So today we're going to be talking about Lean, Six Sigma, 5S, green manufacturing, other types of methods in digital manufacturing, where that fits into that landscape. So I'm going to be your presenter today. We've had some others in the past help out, but it's just going to be me today. We've covered this each time. We have a number of companies that attend, and last time we actually had a company provide us the ability to present some of the things that they had done to improve. Once again, they're beginning their adventure into the digital manufacturing landscape, and it was a very big step and very impressive. So, once again, if anybody has things they like to share or anything like that, we'd love to hear from you, or any ideas or questions. So something I do want to bring up along with the last time, it was Hannibal, an example from Hannibal, a new core company. They build rack systems. And at Autodesk University, we'd like for everyone to go and vote for that example. And I'm going to put the link here in the chat because surely nobody's going to be able to type that all in correctly. So you should see the link there in the chat. If you just take a minute at some point, go there and vote for the Hannibal, a new core company example, we would really appreciate that. So moving right along. Once again, we're open and want engagement. So, if you have any topic suggestions, or you have an opportunity or anything like that you want to discuss, you can feel free to contact me directly. You can see my email here. I'm also on LinkedIn, and that is my phone number where you can reach me at as well. So we're going to have a quick introduction to who I am. If there's anybody new, I'll make it very quick. We're going to have a poll. We'll have a 30-minute presentation. We'll actually have a prize. We've done that each time. And then we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So once again, I'm Josh. I'm a technical solutions specialist here at KETIV. I've got 20 years in manufacturing and engineering. I've done a great number of things throughout those 20 years in the manufacturing environment, from quality control and ISO implementation to manufacturing engineering and many other areas. And I've been certified in a number of these improvement methods as well, such as 5S, Six Sigma, and lean manufacturing, statistical process control. And so we're going to look at those in detail. So real quick, how to win stuff. In order to win, you do have to be on the live presentation here in Zoom. So if you are watching through YouTube or another method, we'll provide a link where you can move over. You must also be present to win. We'll have that opportunity at the end of the session. So we'll have a quick poll. So we should see that pop up here. And so the question is in any of these initiatives that you've been involved in, I'm not sure if you can pick more than one. So if you can only pick one, just pick the one that you've been involved in the greatest. And we'll leave that up for just a little bit so people can answer before we look at the results. So while that's up, we're going to talk a little bit about what we covered last time. So last time we talked about thinking outside of the box, right? And how easy it is to get stuck within our own world and view. And so the idea is the best way to get outside of that is to just do just that. Get outside, see what others are doing. And there's other ways that we're going to talk about eventually, not in this session, but future sessions. And to do that, we had our success story that was shared by Hannibal. And we looked at how data was the cornerstone of digital manufacturing. We've talked about that a lot throughout this series. The automation of design, improvement in communications with the customers, and the data connection between customers, suppliers, and across the value stream, and how that, once again, that data, that single source, and it being provided to everybody quickly and seamlessly improves the whole. So let's take a quick glance at our poll results here. Yeah, so quality management system and 5S are two of the biggest ones. 5S is really, for most company starts, it's a great place to start. And we're going to talk about some of that in our future session when we're talking about culture change. And that's one thing that 5S really helps with, is getting the jump start on changing the culture. So, you know, that's really good to see. And all other methods, nobody involved in lean, but all the other methods have some involvement. So interesting to see. So let's get into it here, right? We have our different methods here. And of course, we could list so many more, right? But these are tend to be the top ones and the ones that I'm most familiar with. So next. So what these mainly are methods of identifying and removing waste in the manufacturing process. And they have focuses in different areas and different methods of doing that. But in general, waste is identified as such as a non-value added process, identified as inefficiencies in the process, unnecessary processes, unused material or tools, in the case of 5S predominantly, unprofitable products or parts can be one of them, particularly in something like the 80-20 methodology, really focuses on that as well as other things. And, so many other definitions, but the idea behind all of it is methods and ways of identifying something that is not profitable, not needed, and removing that as best we can, right? And I mean, this is all great stuff, right? So there's no real problems within that particular area, but there are cases that I've encountered, I've heard about and seen in the industry, in which these methods don't always come to full fruition or what people expect. So there are some shortcomings here. So we're going to look at a few scenarios of what that kind of looks like. So one scenario is that we don't really end up having gains in production, and so output really remains the same. So we've made all these improvements, but our output is the same. So that kind of results in the companies reducing their workforce. They go, well, we've made all these improvements. We got to get some gains. We're not producing anymore. So we got to reduce our workforce so that we can improve our margin. But this results in a loss of skilled labor. And we've seen numerous times and talked about how important that is and how difficult it is to replace, particularly in this current environment. And so they get some gains in their margins, but it's little and it's just in the margins, right? And ultimately, this leaves them no room for growth. So let's look at another scenario. And so I've seen scenarios where the company sees gains, but they're not seeing the big gains they were promised, right? This was supposed to be this huge revolutionary thing that's going to change the company. And so they've seen gains, things are good, but it's just not living up to the hype, right? And, they've made improvements and they've seen situations where some of those improvements, they improved this area, but in another area, it worsened, right? And so they go attack that area and, okay, well, now that area is better, but now it's made this area over here problems. And it's just kind of this continually chasing the problem, right? And ultimately, there's this constant struggle, can't really level load the process. Once again, we're getting gains, but that like idle situation's just not happening. And, the manufacturing process, they can't fully eliminate the things they'd like to, because they need the flexibility to handle issues that come up here and there, or to handle, you know, changes in the customer and the order process and the types of orders coming in. So we can't really, you know, have that ideal situation, because we got to have the flexibility. We still have to have all these extra processes in place. And, you know, we've tried the root cause analysis, but it just led to a lot of fighting and finger pointing and blaming. So we've kind of taken that out, because that was causing a lot of angst, right? Another scenario is see gains. We're meeting customer demands, you know, a lot of improvement, but eventually we cap out and the growth stagnates. So we saw a lot of improvement. It was like, man, this was working, but it hit a point in which, okay, it can't go any further. And so in these situations, people begin to look for other methods in order to not remain stagnant, but, you know, they kind of do. And they begin to make a major shift in the business due to this apparent brick wall. And the only way to get around this brick wall is we've got to completely make a shift and do something completely different in order to continue to make gains. So kind of the question is, what's going on here? Well, why do these things happen, right? Well, one, and I do want to point out scenario 3, that will eventually happen, okay? If we just remain within this concept I'm going to illustrate, right? You will eventually cap out. So let's talk about why. All these methods are focused on the manufacturing floor here, okay? And that's kind of the key, right? We have this idea, and most of these methods utilize this idea of takt time or cycle time, right? The product assembly duration. How much time does it take from the first part, the work starts on the first part, till the product leaves the door, right? That's the time. That's what we're focused on. That's the number. Okay. But we often have all this other processes here, right? And none of this is being taken into consideration with the total time it takes to produce a product, right? And end of the day, it's a garbage in, garbage out situation, right? If all our processes feeding in to the manufacturing floor here have errors and problems and inefficiencies, it's going to have a total effect on this, right? And so while we can make gains and improvements here, and there are their own issues within the manufacturing floor, and those have to be, you know, still need to be addressed and can be addressed, they're not the only thing affecting what's going on the manufacturing floor, right? And the reality is, if we don't take the rest of this stuff into consideration when it comes to our takt time or cycle time or the total time it takes to produce a product, we may make our manufacturing floor so efficient that we can produce that product that used to take 2 weeks, we can do it in a day. But if it still takes 2 weeks from the time the customer makes the order till the time we start producing it, we still have a whole lot of improvement that we can make there. So, and of course, that would assume an ideal manufacturing environment. But if your process leading into it is that efficient, you'll never meet that ideal manufacturing environment, okay? So let's look at some different examples here, and, you know, maybe we can glean from that how to address this issue, right? So one example, and if I have any previous winners here, this is coming from a book and that we have been giving along with the prize, and it's called Upstream. And I'm giving a little away here in the idea here. Okay. So if you've been reading that, this is the examples here, right? So the company Expedia, we're all pretty familiar with them. You plan your trips with Expedia, right? So they had a very high satisfaction rate. And along with that, their help center call time was very low. They get a help center call, they could resolve it quick, right? So things were looking really good. However, there was one thing that was honestly ignored for a long time. And then finally, somebody kind of pointed out, look, we got a high number of calls per employee, a very high number of calls. So yeah, satisfaction rate's high, call center time's really low. And these are usually the two metrics everybody looks at. But if we consider the number of calls per employee, that's a really high number. So what was the problem there? Well, out of 100 people who booked a flight on their site, 58 of them were calling for help because they couldn't find the itinerary in order to print it. Okay, a very simple issue. Resolution was quick and low. The call center employees go, oh yeah, it's no problem. I'll just send it to you. They were happy. You know, everything worked out great, but they had to have a large number of call center employees just to address this simple issue. So when they changed the website, it's not that it wasn't available, but when they changed the website and made it far easier to find and access, it saved $100 million. That's huge. Such a seemingly small, insignificant issue had such a massive effect on the company, right? So another example is LinkedIn. Once again, I'm pretty sure we're all on LinkedIn, right? But it's basically a social media for the work environment, right? So anyways, if you're not familiar with it, hop on there. The month 11, they were seeing a large drop in usage, okay? And LinkedIn would attempt to regain the usage at that point. They would pour a large number of resources and a lot of expense into trying to keep and retain these people and keep them from leaving, okay, or stop using LinkedIn. And so they started looking, they had data, they had a large amount of data, but they weren't really looking at it and utilizing it. So they finally got around to looking at this data that they had. And they found that really at week 4, they could accurately determine whether somebody was going to drop their usage by month 11. Okay, so they could see really early on whether or not that person was going to drop or not. So they invested in the onboarding process, right? Once again, moving upstream, right? Rather than pouring in more and more resources after the fact, they moved as far up as possible. And they invested a large amount of resources on the onboarding process in order to prevent people from dropping at all. And this resulted in tens of millions of dollars in profit. We're going to look at another very interesting example here. So there was a flight, Northwest Airlines flight 188. It flew past the destination airport by over 100 miles. And in fact, had the pilot not put extra fuel on board, they probably wouldn't have made the landing. They had missed the handoff, the ATC handoff. They didn't increase the volume on their secondary comms, so ATC couldn't contact them on the emergency frequency there. They missed text messages that were sent to the screen of the aircraft, and the aircraft intercept, which happens 400 times a year. Aircraft are intercepted due to loss of communication. That didn't happen either. So this plane just kept on flying, and they flew for an hour and a half. These pilots were there. They were just simply distracted, and they were distracted for an hour and a half. Okay. And the thing I really want to point out with this, okay, and the reason I use this example is you see how many, and there's even more than this, okay, but these are just some of the key areas, the preventative measures that are put in place to prevent this from happening, right? But notice every single one of these methods are after the fact, and we're going to hit this a little bit later. But all these methods were in place to prevent this very thing from happening. But look, it still happens 400 times a year. To me, when I learned about that, that's kind of scary. 400 aircraft intercepts. That means they sent up a military aircraft to go intercept another aircraft. 400 times a year, simply distracted. The reason they were distracted was there was a new flight duty bidding system. It's simply a system in which the pilots, attempt to pick what flights they're going to do. And it was so convoluted and so complex that they spent an hour and a half discussing it, trying to figure it out and learn it on this flight, distracting them from all these things for an hour and a half. Garbage in, garbage out, right? Now, the typical is these pilots, you go, look, you didn't increase your COM2 volume. You weren't paying attention to your screens. You weren't doing X, Y, X, Y, X, Y, and Z. But end of the day, if this flight duty bidding system wasn't so convoluted and complex, this would have never happened, period, right? So let's go back to our example here, right? And once again, the idea of moving upstream, right? We have to consider the whole system, right? And what's going on across that whole system. So let's look at a simple and typical example that I have encountered a lot throughout my years in manufacturing. So we have this situation in which we have rework, right? So we've got this rework and we want to eliminate it. So we look into this situation. We go, well, this rework is predominantly happening because the drawings or the information that's feeding into our shop here, it doesn't contain the information or it's not correct, right? So we got to address that issue. So we put a check in place and we get this guy that we're like, he really knows this stuff really well. He's been working here for 20 years and he knows this stuff. So we're going to have him look over this stuff. One, make sure there's even information. And two, if, he can try and see if it's correct because he can identify whether it's good information or not the majority of the time, right? So, but we're still having issues and he gets frustrated. So he's like, look, engineering, they're not getting this information right. And, they've got to correct it. So engineering is like, well, we're just doing what we can with the information coming from sales. Okay. So it's the sales guys, they've got to make sure they're giving us that information because we send it through because we didn't have the information we needed. And, we don't know if it's correct or not. That's what we were given from the sales guy. The sales guy's like, well, I'm not getting what I need from the customer in a timely manner. So engineers like, look, we'll put a check in place. If there ain't information on here, then, we're not going to accept it. Right. So now we've got 2 checks in place, 2 more employees spending time. Right. And, end of the day, they're still not holding stuff up because we can't not produce a quote and sell and start production because if we don't start that and it's just this little bit of information, then that's going to hold up the whole thing. And then the customer's not going to be happy. So we got to get this thing through. Right. So we still go past the checks at points. And so we've still got some rework getting through after all this. Okay. So then we go, you know what? If we just got to send this stuff through in those scenarios, then we're not going to send it through the machine. We're just going to manually cut it at the end of the process that we're not taking up machine time and producing multiple pieces. And so ultimately, we've eliminated the rework, but our production is not, it might be a little more efficient, but look what we've done to our upstream processes. And we've created more mess and we're less efficient on a whole. We've had to increase the work done by the employees in order to address this one minor situation, right? So end of the day, these are what I like to call Band-Aids, right? They're not fixing the problem. We're just putting a Band-Aid over it in each one of these places and trying to contain the bleeding as best we can, but we're not addressing why the bleeding's happening in the first place, right? Because if we can address that, then we don't need any of these Band-Aids. They all go away, right? So let's look at it a little different way here, right? So we have customer, feeds sales, sales feeds engineering, engineering feeds the drawing or the information, and that ultimately leads to the shop. We've got rework. Well, we can eliminate that by automating this process, right? And it's more than just automation, because in order to automate, we have to have the data, right? Once again, we still go, well, but if the customer's not providing the data, then we still can't do this, right? And that's the issue in the first place, okay? And we'll address that here in a second, okay? But the key here is that we end up with a single source of data running through this system, okay? And we have automated this system, freeing up our employees to do more meaningful work, right? Instead of this mundane. So if you do have a situation in which we're not getting the information we need, the sales guys aren't saying, well, or the engineering guy isn't saying, well, I don't have the time to get that information because I got to get this other stuff through. Now they do have the time to get that information, okay? And that's one benefit of addressing that scenario, but there's other benefits as well. So here's, a simple example that we have here, in which a lot of times the customer isn't providing the information because they don't know what information is needed, or the sales guy isn't asking quite the right question in order to get that information, okay? Or maybe that information can be derived from other more common pieces of information, okay? Or in addition to that, maybe we can derive the majority of it, and because they don't know that piece of information, they don't really need to know that piece of information, because a suggestion can be provided to them that meets 90% of what they do know and need. The other 10% isn't, it's necessary to produce the product, but it's not necessarily important to the customer. We don't have it to produce the product, so we're not moving on. But if we can make a suggestion to the customer and go, okay, here's fits 90%, is that good enough? The majority of the time, they're going to go, oh yeah, that looks great, because that's the information I knew, because that's the information that's important to me. And it's your job to do the rest, okay? So in a scenario like that, there is forms of automation that can, one, ask the right questions the right way, provide information immediately back in return. It can optimize based upon information, such as the application of the product, such as the area of the world it's being put in, such as the customer themselves or the type of industry they're in, right? If it's in one part of the world versus a different part of the world, then there are standards that go along with that. Well, we can put all that in, and then we don't have to ask the customer, is this material okay there? The system knows. Is it okay to have these two pieces this close together? Is that a good spot? Like, well, that's, the customer doesn't know. Well, the customer doesn't need to know, because it's in here based upon who the customer is or where it's coming from, or whether they're wanting to optimize on price versus optimize on performance, things like that. There's software that can make those determinations and suggestions, and then can immediately, every selection they make can provide a result back and feedback to the customer, resulting in ultimately the drawings and models being automated and made completely without any human involvement, ultimately resorting in quotes being produced in minutes versus weeks or months in some cases, quotes in maybe it's a couple days versus weeks or months. Rework due to bad or missing data is pretty much eliminated, because you don't move on. But on a whole, you don't move on. That was the scary thing before. We can't move on, but we've got to get this started, right? Well, if you're producing these quotes and all your information in minutes or a couple days, well, yeah, it's not a big deal to move on till you have it all, because you're still way ahead and you're not feeding trash, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Now we're feeding in good information, which results in a good result. And so the whole value stream becomes more efficient, and the shop can truly be transformed. And so the idea here too is that not that there's any inherently things wrong with these methods, but if we take this approach, then we can fully gain the advantage of those methodologies. Okay. So, and this also makes us more versatile and scalable. Okay. And I'm going to move on here. So the key here is becoming proactive versus reactive. On the left, we have the reactive is let's set up a call center and let's make sure we resolve those calls as fast as possible. That's what we're going to measure our employees on. But that doesn't provide an incentive to eliminate the calls. And that's something we're going to talk about next time too, is what are we incentivizing? Okay. You know, the time and effort spent trying to regain a lost customer after they're gone, instead of making sure that they never leave in the first place, right? Investing on that onboarding process. You know, the example with the aircraft, we got the second emergency comms, we got the text messages, the aircraft intercept and so forth, right? Or, hey, we just make sure that their workload is manageable and that they're not under stress, right? Proactive there. Shop rework. Well, we can deal with that instead of dealing with it in the shop or down the stream. We go all the way upstream, provide information and automation, get a single source of data from beginning to end so that we're not feeding garbage into the shop, but we improve the shop by feeding good information into the shop. Get to the next slide. There we go. So I think we've looked at this before. The booking institution determined that manufacturers must embrace technologies like artificial intelligence, automation, and big data to keep production and product delivery quality high. Okay. Notice we're talking about production and we're talking about quality. And those things come from automation and data and artificial intelligence, right? So once again, that's because these things are going fully upstream and addressing the information coming into the system, making sure that's good. And ultimately, that's the key to this transformation cycle that we've seen so many times, right? Increasing our efficiency, that results in an increase in production, an increase in quality. That leads to an increase in sales, margins, and revenue. We reinvest that and just continue that upward cycle. So with that, we will next time on May 11th, we'll be discussing culture change, okay? Because end of the day, we can, I've, once again, I fought it so much myself. I get a great product, we implement it, we got this great new software, and nobody uses it, right? Doesn't matter how great the software is if people don't use it. How are we going to identify areas that we can improve if we don't have people looking and thinking in the right directions, right? So how do we get people to shift and make that change? So we're going to be talking about that next time. And so that'll be May 11th. Once again, at any point, you can schedule a one-on-one opportunity we can help look and find areas that can be improved and see what we can do there. And then, of course, we're always open to topic discussions and so forth. So let's take a moment here and see who our winner is. And our winner is Michael Airy. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Michael Airy. And let's see. Yeah, and that's in the chat there. So just send a private message to either me or the host KETIV with your email address, and we will make sure that we get that to you. And that's going to be $75 total value. Will include the book that we're kind of discussing and following here, and then a gift card to finish out that value there. So Michael Airy. Okay, well, Christina is going to email you. All right. And let's get to the next slide here. So we also have the KETIV Virtual Academy. That is really focused on the products and methods that we offer, and is really intended for the technical side of things. So we'll cover things like Inventor, what's new, or how to achieve a certain result in Inventor and things like that. And let's move to the next slide. Going here. And so once again, if you can take the opportunity to, suggest the Hannibal example to Autodesk University. Once again, this is the example we talked about last time. That would really be appreciated. That link is in the chat, available for you. And so with that, we can open up for some Q&A, and we'll take just a few minutes. If anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to share at this point. It doesn't look like we have any questions right now, but once again, if you have any questions, anything you want to dive deeper into, want to look at how we can dive in with you and find areas that we can improve and begin the digital transformation. Everybody kind of has to start at a different place depending on where they're at, what they have available. We'll look at that and produce a plan with you and for you and help you through the process, because we want to be your partner in the long term. So with that, we will go ahead and end, and appreciate all of you for your time.